Apollo 16, The Moon Mission by Michael Kondratyk. Hi, I am Michael Kondratyk, a junior at the Elon University. I will be your reporter today to discuss Apollo 16, the fifth moon landing. The Apollo 16 crew included Tom Ken Mattingly on the left, John W. Young, the captain, in the middle, and Charles M. Duke on the right. Mattingly, John Young, and Charles Duke made history together on the fifth moon landing. Young was the mission commander and spaceflight legend. Duke was the youngest person ever to walk the moon, and Mattingly piloted on the command module after missing Apollo 13. Together, they made a great team. This spaceship is known as Apollo 16. Apollo 16 spacecraft had two separate names: Casper, which was the command module, and Orion, the lunar module. It consisted of three main parts, which was Casper, service module, and Orion. The command module, Casper, carried the crew during launch, lunar orbit, and re-entry. The size was about 11 feet tall and 13 feet wide. The weight was around 1,200 pounds, and all astronauts stayed in Casper during traveling times. The lunar module, Orion, was part of the spaceship. However, it was the one that detached from the entire spacecraft and landed on the moon with the two astronauts, Young and Duke. The weight was around 33,000 pounds and it had two stages. It had descent stage left on the moon and ascent stage returned back to orbit. And the last component of the spacecraft was the service module. Its function held fuel, power systems, oxygen, and scientific equipment, almost like a warehouse. It was not recovered, as before it re-entered the Earth, it was detached. Wow, the Apollo 16 spacecraft is truly amazing. Now moving on to the spacesuits. These were created by International Latex Corporations, and they weighed about 185 pounds on Earth. Here is a description and diagrams of each suit the astronauts wore. The Apollo 16 astronaut suits, called extravehicular mobility units (EMUs), were like personal spacecrafts for the moon. Each suit was made up of multiple layers of protective fabric and insulation to handle extreme temperatures ranging from negative 250 to over 250 degrees Fahrenheit, micrometeorite impacts, and radiation from the sun. They had a portable life support backpack for oxygen, cooling, and communication, a gold-coated visor to protect from sunlight, and red stripes on the commander's suit, John Young, so you could tell him apart in the photos. Two important figures: designer of the Saturn V rocket, Wernher von Braun, discussed it with Vice President Spiro Agnew moments before the launch. Astronaut Elle Bean in the center briefs with the two daughters of President Richard Nixon and their husbands about the Apollo 16 launch, Julia and David Eisenhower. This image shows King Hassan of Jordan waving to the crowd. All these people were very important figures during the 1970s, which shows how important Apollo 16, the fifth moon launch, was in this era. After the team prepared and the astronauts were ready, on April 16, 1972, at 12:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Apollo 16 spacecraft lifted off from Launch Pad 39A at the Kennedy Spacecraft Center in Florida. After burning for 2 minutes and 42 seconds and lifting the rocket to an altitude of 40 miles, the first engine shut off and the stage jetonized. The second stage continued to power the ascent until 9 minutes and 20 seconds, taking the spacecraft nearly to orbit, at which this time it was jetonized as well. And the third stage took over. It burned for 2 minutes to place Apollo 16 into a circular 105-mile-high parking orbit around the Earth. For the next 2.5 hours, the spacecraft orbited the Earth. The three astronauts removed their helmets and gloves but kept their suits on. They could proceed with translunar injection, TLI, the second burn of the Saturn's V's third stage to send them out of Earth's orbit and towards the moon. The engine ignited and fired for 5 minutes and 51 seconds, increasing Apollo 16's velocity to 24,229 miles per hour to begin the 3-day coast to the moon. In Mission Control, Flight Director Gerard D. Griffin and his gold team of controllers, including Capcom Henry Hank Hartsfield, took their consoles to monitor the astronauts as they began their first sleep period in space, about 80,000 miles away from Earth. When the crew woke up, they were now 113 miles from Earth. The astronauts on board took a series of ultraviolet photographs of the Earth to show that Apollo 16 spacecraft was heading to the moon and farther away from the Earth. By the third day of travel, they were 176,000 miles away from Earth. Precisely 74 hours and 28 minutes after leaving Earth, Apollo 16 was behind the moon and it fired its SPS engine for 6 minutes and 14 seconds to enter an elliptical around the moon. After Apollo 16 successfully entered the lunar orbit, the crew prepared for the next critical phase, descend the moon's surface. However, a malfunction in the spacecraft's main engine system raised concerns about the ability to perform the necessary maneuvers for a safe return to Earth. Mission Control deliberated for several hours before determining that the issue could be managed, allowing the mission to proceed. On April 20th, 1972, the lunar module Orion, carrying astronauts John Young and Charles Duke, separated from the command module Casper, piloted by Ken Mattingly. Orion descended to the lunar surface, landing in the Discartes Highlands. Once the astronauts touched down at the Discartes site in the lunar highlands, they conducted 3 surface excursions totaling more than 20 hours using a lunar roving vehicle for transportation. They collected 209 pounds of rock and soil samples and set up the first telescope on the moon. Duke and Young, the 2 astronauts on the moon, captured this image of the Earth using the ultraviolet camera. It shows the false color ultraviolet image of the Earth from where they were. This image shows the passive seismic experiment. This instrument was used to measure seismic vibrations, including those caused by moonquakes, meteor impacts, and artificial events, to study the moon's internal structure. This instrument was part of the mortar pack of Apollo 16 active seismic experiment, which was a device designed to fire small explosive charges into the lunar surface to generate seismic waves, helping scientists study the moon's subsurface structure. The Lunar Surface Magnetometer was designed to measure the moon's magnetic field at the Discartes Highlands landing site. All these experiments were very impactful for understanding the moon's magnetic field, what the inside layers of the moons were like, and just our basic understanding of what the moon really is. This is an image of Charles Duke on the rim of the Plum Crater. Plum Crater is approximately 130 feet in diameter and 30 feet deep. This served as Apollo 16's first geological sample site. This was where astronauts John Young and Charles Duke collected numerous rock and soil samples. This included Big Muley, which was the largest rock returned from the moon. This image shows the solar wind composition experiment, which involved placing a sheet of ultra-pure aluminum foil on the lunar surface to collect particles from the solar wind. When returning this foil back to Earth for laboratory analysis, it provided valuable data on the element composition of solar wind particles, including noble gases like helium, neon, and argon. Young and Duke, the 2 astronauts, would use this land rover to travel all across the moons. The object on the left is the lunar module, which is parked on the moon, and they would drive around this lunar rover to different areas on the moon in order to find different rocks or test different soils, and they would come back to their lunar module where they would sleep at night. When the astronauts would go to different locations to test different sampling stations, these 3 different rocks were at 3 different locations, and you could see a visible difference for each one. This was during their second moonwalk. This represents how the astronauts would take different samples from different rocks located all over the moon, and this helped with their experiments of understanding what these materials were made of. After doing multiple experiments and traveling all across the moons using the land rover, this represents the final location of the lunar module Orion. This map is a representation of where the astronauts Young and Duke traveled during their time on the moon. Different locations marked on the map was where a lot of experiments went down, including gathering soils and rocks from. Before finally leaving, Charles Duke left a picture of his family on the lunar surface, as well as a piece of beta cloth written 464C, and Duke left a medallion on the lunar surface to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United States Air Force. After being on the moon for 71 hours and finally completing their lunar mission, Apollo 16 astronauts John Young, Charles Duke, and Thomas Ken Mattingly returned to Earth, splashing down in the Pacific Ocean on April 27, 1972. The command module Casper was safely recovered by the USS, concluding the mission. After being away from Earth 11 days, 1 hour, and 51 minutes, Apollo 16 was the fifth mission to land humans on the moon. Some key findings included lunar geology. The mission exploration of the Discarcus Highlands revealed that the region's terrain, previously thought to be volcanic in origin, was actually formed by impact processes. This discovery changed existing theories about the moon's geological history. Another key finding was lunar samples. Astronauts collected approximately 209 pounds of lunar rock and soil samples. Analysis of these samples provided insights into the moon's composition and the processes that have shaped its surface. To continue, another finding was the far ultraviolet camera. Apollo 16 deployed the first astronomical telescope on the camera, which captured images of the Earth's upper atmosphere and deep space objects in ultraviolet light, contributing to the field of space astronomy. Another mission included the deployment of the magnetometer to measure the moon's magnetic field. The data collected helped scientists understand the moon's internal structure and its magnetic history. The last major experiment was the solar wind composition. A device was deployed to collect particles from the solar wind. The analysis of these particles upon return to Earth provided information about the composition of the solar wind and its interaction with the lunar surface. These findings from Apollo 16 have been instrumental in shaping our current understanding of the moon's geological history and its environment. Thank you for watching.